Good evening, and I think I'm live. So, thank you for joining those that are online. I'm hoping that quite a few people are going to jump in, especially since we had a quite an eventful webinar last week with lots of questions from both landlords and renters. So, major changes for the rental market for 2024. And we've been expecting these, of course, from the Renters Reform Bill. A lot on the headlines about this. In fact, I have some I want to share with you right now. One being from the Standard. This was a few months ago, actually, with regards to Rishi Sunak faces Tory revolt over new renting laws, which includes a ban on so-called fault evictions. Now, this has been a big one, especially for landlords. This came out back in October, and it's been quite unpopular with landlords. However, renters, of course, are very keen on this passing law. Interestingly enough, there's been a delay on this, and it will happen, from what I understand. And yet, there is a delay until the government gets themselves sorted out with regards to the court. Now, one thing I also wanted to share was the a delay on the. Let me bear with me. Let me see. Oh, something's going on with my cursor, so apologies. Not sure what's jumping in and out. So we've got Renters Reform Bill. Bill government reveals another Commons delay. So we were expecting an announcement, in the lot. In I think it was actually this week or next week, and it's been delayed. Again, a lot of landlords keen to find out what's happening with this. And today's purpose of this live video is actually to share with you those proposals with you. For those of you that already know what's going on, that's going to be just a nice sort of feedback as to what's on the proposal and what's to come in 2024. At least that's what we expect, and let's see if that actually is going to happen. So I'm going to show you some slides, especially the slides that I was showing over a webinar, which proved to be very popular. So I'm just going to share that with you. So we have the Renters Reform Bill. And here, bear with me one sec. Oh, if I can go back. Having some technical issues here, so apologies. Okay, so we've got the areas of reform. We've got decent home standards, private rented property portal, abolishment of Section 21, private rented sector of ombudsman for all private landlords. I'm going to break this down for all of you. Some of you, this may already be familiar, whether you're a landlord or you're a renter, but I'm going to go deep and explain a little bit about this and where we are right now and how popular perhaps these may be. So we've got decent home standards. Now, what exactly is this? Now, this actually started from the social sector and is now moving into the private sector. It aims to improve the property conditions of a property, repair modern facilities, and so forth. Approximately around 79% of the private sector actually meet these standards. It is my impression, at least from my experience in London, most of these that do meet these standards are going to be in London, at least prime London. I don't see that much in prime London that doesn't meet with this. Again, can be completely wrong, but that's my experience having worked in prime London. Now, cost for the upgrades is not specified, so we're just waiting for that and see what that means for landlords. That is something that makes a lot of people nervous. So we got costs for upgrades remain. Property portals now will play a major role in compliance. Enforcement includes criminal and banning orders. Again, making a lot of landlords quite nervous as to how much it's going to cost and what the risk is going to be for them. So much so that a lot of landlords have been exiting. A lot of people have put this towards the exit in the market because of the mortgage rates and taxes. But in fact, the regulation or the proposed regulations has a lot to do with this. So that's going to be something that's very interesting. Bear with me one moment. Let me just look something up here. Okay, now we have the next slide, which is new private rented sector ombudsman. Now, at the moment, the landlords, letting agents are obligated to be signed up with an ombudsman, and the landlords aren't. Now, this is something that I agree with the government in terms of bringing this in for private landlords as well, because it doesn't seem exactly fair that for tenants at least and renters, that a landlord can bypass uh, have been, the tenants and the renters having the ability to be able to call out and an ombudsman if they have any challenges or if they have any complaints, if they are renting directly from the landlord. So I think this is completely fair, whether it's a letting agent or whether it's a landlord, that they are able to actually have the ability to contact the ombudsman for any issues. It's just going to streamline dispute resolutions. Tenants can seek free redress for complaints, and non-compliant landlords may face banning orders and court enforcement. The good thing is that landlords will have the ability to receive training from the ombudsman, and of course, that's always a good thing. I believe that the government is pushing this towards landlords that can be more knowledgeable and be more compliant and keeping renters safe, which can only be a good thing as long as the resources are there and available. Okay, now we're going to jump on to the next one, which is the abolishment of Section 21. Again, this one was a real big one for landlords and renters, making a lot of landlords quite nervous. But I can tell you, I believe it's Scotland or Wales or both, they don't have this, and it hasn't been a huge challenge for them. Now, if they've survived this, I'm pretty sure England can survive this as well. This is a Section 21, which allows the landlord to actually serve a notice to the tenant and ask them to vacate the property without any excuse or any reason whatsoever. This is going to be abolished at some point. Again, government is just trying to get themselves sorted with the courts before they actually introduce this. Rental reform bill confirmed the end of no-fault evictions. The change aims to empower tenants and address insecurity. Landlords will need reasons to end the tenancies. So again, there is another Section 8 which will allow landlords to serve notice. It will be for some specific reasons. So we'll see some changes then. It will be interesting as months go past as to what these reasons are going to be. Mainly they are and currently are going to be with regards to getting possession again because they need the property for their own home, because they're going to sell the property, or perhaps a family member needs the home for whatever reason. So there are grounds there for possession, and also the grounds in terms of strength. They're going to be strengthened for social behavior, antisocial behavior, and other related grounds. So, end of fixed term tenancies. Now, what does this mean? So currently we can have a fixed term tenancy, which is aimed to give security to the tenants themselves, which is ironic because the government actually wants to give sort of that long term perspective for both landlords and tenants. And usually tenants are going to be 12 months, 24 months in general, at least here in London. We've seen that increase actually over the course of the last few years. And that is at the back, of course, of the of the demand that there is out there for tenants. Now, what the government is saying is that this is going to come to an end, and they're going to have a ban on this, and there will be the fixed term tenancy is now going to move on to something perhaps like a periodic statutory tenancy agreement, whereby the tenants can give no less than 2 months notice to the landlord to vacate. So they can move in today, and in a month's time, they can say, well, actually, you know what, I want to move, and give 2 months notice, which of course isn't great for landlords in terms of having that certainty of long-term tenancies, but that's how the government is pushing forward at the moment. I hope you guys are finding this helpful. And again, if there is anything that any questions that you may have, feel free to just put that through on the questions tab, and we will be more than happy to ask this. So we've got quite a few things here in terms of rogue landlords and what this means for the market in terms of number of properties available, which is certainly a fair question, because that demand and supply certainly hasn't reached its balance. That being said, we are seeing in the last few weeks and months that it's starting to change. So what does it mean with regards to rogue landlords? Well, it does mean that hopefully, with a little bit of luck, we're going to have less of those. They do give a bad name to the industry, and especially to agents as well. So let's not get this wrong. Both renters, tenants, and agents want them, and landlords actually, those who abide and comply, actually do want those rogue landlords out of the industry, because to be fair, most landlords do comply and want to do the right thing. So further changes: limit rent increases to once a year with a capped amount of 2 months notice. To be honest with you, this is something that's already happening. I don't know many landlords or agents that increase the rent within before a year. It's illegal to universally ban families. So this is, if agents or landlords put a property on the market online and to say, this property, no families or children should apply for this property, or people who have just come out of prison, there's gonna be a ban on that, and that's fair enough. And pets is also a major thing. So at the moment, a lot of renters actually looking for properties at the moment. They do struggle in getting properties who allow pets. That's going to be banned, but of course, everything's relevant. If it's not safe to have a pet there, or there is, for example, some restrictions on the head lease on having pets, then that's something that's going to be reasonable to not allow. So that will be interesting how that's going to work out. And also, a lot of landlords have been asking as to how does that work? How's it going to protect me as a landlord to be able to protect my property? Because a pet may increase that wear and tear, and there might be more damage to property. And I believe one of the things that the government is proposing is that there's some type of insurance in place before the landlord can accept tenants with pets, and that's fair enough, because that is a fair concern from a lot of landlords. So jumping on to the next slide. So further changes. Let me bring this up. So further changes: rent in advance, restrictions on amount that can be charged. So of course, if there isn't any fixed term tenancy, then by the very nature of you charging 12 months in advance, that will imply that you have a fixed tenancy. So that's very likely to come to an end. So you charging, because at the moment, a lot of landlords are asking for rent in advance for whatever reason. That could be, of course, because of referencing, or because maybe they have just a preference of having the rent in advance. And let's face it, you can get that rent in advance because there's so much demand out there. And so they ask for 12 months in advance. That's very likely going to come to an end. And then stronger powers for council enforcement, fines, banning orders, and so forth. So there's definitely going to be a devolution. We're already seeing that at the moment, more powers passing from central government to councils to make decisions, regulations, and fines. We're already seeing that already. So that brings us to common mistakes. Now, before I jump on to common mistakes and sticking to the rent reform, again, anyone who has any questions can just jump on and ask. At the moment, we were asked about rent control, came up a lot. I don't believe that's something that's been proposed or something that's going to come up at least over this year or in this proposal. Another question was short-term rentals and what's happening with that. So definitely is going to be a register for short-term rentals. The government definitely wants to have more control over that, and a lot of more fines. So at the moment, for example, in London, you do have that 90-day rule. I don't believe a lot of landlords actually follow that rule, and for those who are abusing that, there's going to be definitely more regulation with regards to that. So keep an eye as to what change is going to be happening for those short-term rental properties, because from the government's perspective and from the council, what they feel is that that's taken away from long-term tenancies and residents having a home. So the less of that that's on the short term, the more of that's going to be on the long term. But of course, it's very attractive for landlords to be able to have that short term. The margins are higher, and there are also some tax benefits from that as well. So with mortgage rates being high, and the overall cost for landlords, short-term rental continues to be very, very attractive. Again, any questions, just put it on the chat, but otherwise, just feel free to reach out to me. You can find the link to my calendar on the description, and that's something that we can book an appointment, and I will hopefully be able to share with you more information, especially for landlords out there that are concerned about their tenancies, that already have a tenancy in place and want a free health tenancy checkup consultancy. Just feel free to make an appointment. I'm more than happy to jump on a call, 15-minute call. The link will be on the description. So one thing I did want to share, and this is again, this is helpful for both landlords and renters, because the same mistakes that the landlords come across is going to be kind of the same mistakes or challenges and obstacles that renters come across as well. So I wanted to start with safety certificates, licensing, and so forth. So safety certificates, just making sure that you get those certificates in place. They're in place before the tenancy starts. Throughout the tenancy, make sure that they are being updated accordingly and they are being served to your tenant as well. Licensing, there are so many different licensing when it comes to certain boroughs, whether that's in London or that's other parts and other regions of the UK and England. You've got things like selective licensing. You've got mandatory HMOs and additional HMOs. So knowing the difference between all, it's so important, especially those selective licensing, which have popped up in different regions. Newham, I believe, the borough of Newham came up with this selective licenses a few years back, actually, and a lot of boroughs followed suit. Now, the challenge with this is that when the council decides to do this, how they promote this and how they make landlords aware isn't the best. They don't make the best efforts to make you aware. So it's up to you as a landlord to make sure that you're on top of this. And if they introduce this, that you are actually doing what you need to do to have the proper license to be able to rent a property. It is my impression that with this rent reform, councils are probably not, those that haven't implemented selective licenses are probably not going to do this, because with this new landlord portal, this is probably going to cover this area. That is my impression. Again, any borough that you're in, just make sure you're on top of things. Deposit registrations, making sure that the deposit registration and the prescribed information is served to your tenant. That's going to be very challenging if you don't, for both the tenant, your renter, and the landlord themselves. Lack of inspections, that's also something that I see is very common with landlords. And of course, that becomes an issue with tenants as well. At the end of the tenancy, trying to figure out from a deposit scheme as to what's actually the tenant's responsibility, how much money is going to go back to the tenants themselves. And then the renewals and rent increases. Of course, with rents going up so high over the course of the 3 years, actually, that's probably around about 30%. That holds true for London. Last year was around about 10%, almost 10% in London. This year, we're going to find that's around about 2% according to Zoopla. I think that's going to lie more so around about 4% in certain parts of London. But why is that an issue? It's an issue if a lot of landlords, which is great, who have the fortunate position to say, I'm not going to increase rents for my tenants, despite the market rates having increased so much. And that's totally fair. However, when they have to increase those rents for whatever reason, the personal financial circumstances change or their mortgage comes into play, and now they're going to have to, that rent compared to 2 years or 3 years ago is going to be huge. To try and bring that back to market rates right now, the tenant, of course, understanding is going to feel, you know what, that's a huge difference. And that's where problems come in. So it's more sensible to be able to increase those rents incrementally every year, rather than just suddenly and try to get that rate. It's not going to be great in terms of the relationship with your tenant if they want to stay. But I'm all for having a below market rate rent for tenants that are already in place. It definitely helps in terms of avoiding void periods, which you're not getting many of those right now, but also keeping costs to a minimum. And let's face it, just having a tenant that you already know and that perhaps you're not going to have challenges further down the line. So, we got other questions here. We got what does this mean for investing in properties in the future? Which is a fair question. I guess from an investment point of view, I think it's a great opportunity for landlords who have cash. And we've seen this over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. In fact, if we look at the biggest buyer right now, in terms of percentage of people buying last year, it was actually cash buyers to begin with, number one, be it that people upsizing, downsizing, first time buyers who are fortunate enough to have the cash, whether from parents or otherwise. Cash buyers made the largest part of buyers last year. The second part or third part was buy to let investors who had cash, not so much buy to let investors who depended on finance, understandably, especially when buy to let rates were kind of around about 3% or so over the course of the last few years and shot up to around about 7%. So that's what it means to investors. For investors, I think it proves to be a great opportunity in cash. But even if you don't have cash, I think there are properties that at the moment in terms of yield are great, especially in London. London is very well known for having low yields. But of course, the way you win with property in London is going to be capital growth. But I've seen some very healthy yields over the course of the last sort of 12 to 18 months. I remember London struggling to achieve anywhere around about 4% if you were lucky. And in the last few months, I've seen yields up to around about 5%, which is refreshing to see because you normally just see that up in the north. So definitely an opportunity for investors. I think there's a window of opportunity for them because I think things are going to change, especially in the last few weeks as we've seen the first-time buyers come back into the market, of course, with more confidence and more comfortability with the rates that we're seeing at the moment. So there are much more demand as there was in comparison to the end of last year, so the last quarter. I believe we saw there was another question here. So for those wanting to, and it finished there. So I believe that's down to the investor question. So another question here is: in light of the renters reform bill and other market changes, what strategies or best practices do you recommend for positive landlord-tenant relationships? Um, okay. So, in light of what strategies, best practices do you recommend for positive landlord-tenant relationship? So, I'm going to be a bit broad on this, regardless of the changes of the reform bill. Just in general, communication is definitely the best practice. I'm going to take a step back in terms of relationships with tenants. So, I'm a big believer. Um, from an investor's point of view, when you invest in property, I'm a big believer to sticking in your lane. So, what type of tenants is it that you are going to have the best rapport with? For example, there are agents or landlords who like to stick to professionals, single professionals, young professionals, and it's not because professional families are challenging in any way, but it's the way that they're able to build better rapport with them, and therefore their process and systems are more towards this type of profile tenant. But I think communication is always key in any type of relationship, whether that's tenant, landlord, friends, family members, mum, dad, whatever that may be. So keeping that open communication and just really being able to um, do the right thing when it comes to keeping the property up to date. The best approach with regards to a landlord to tenant is definitely being able to not compromise on quality and really just spot issues before they arise. So, for example, if you have a tenant in place for 2, 3, 4 years, the likelihood is that certain machines, be it washing machines, be it paint or anything like that, just make sure you visit the property regularly. Regularly being at least once a year at the very least. If you have an agent, very likely being able to visit twice a year, and be able to just make sure that your tenant is happy with everything. So again, best thing would be communication and approaching your tenant and asking if any issues are happening with the property that you can anticipate, and make sure you update that. I guess that's the best advice that I can give. I hope that's helpful. And see if we have any other questions on this. Okay, great. So we were on common mistakes, and to wrap this up, I don't know if I've gone over. Actually, we're probably bang on time. So we said around about 30 minutes. We can go over if there's any other questions. But with regards to the common mistakes, a lack of thorough referencing. So this is again to protect the landlords. If you have an agent, then one would think that you're paying the agent to make sure that they are doing all their due diligence, credit checks, landlord, and finance, sort of any CCJs and bankruptcies and so forth. Now, one thing is to say that, of course, there is the referencing that you take, and going back to the relationship, having a great conversation or good conversation with the with the proposed tenants is something that's going to be sensible as well, because there could be personality clashes as well. Something can look great on paper, and I've had this happen lots of times, where on paper, it seems like a good fit for both landlords and those tenants, but then when having actually that communication with the tenant, there can be a personality clash. And I'm not saying personality clash from the tenant's perspective. It could be the landlord. The landlord is just challenging for whatever reason, and perhaps for that tenant, the landlord's not a good fit for them. So just keeping that in mind is going to be incredibly important. In terms of any problems or challenges that may arise, it's important to note that there are insurance in place, and I believe landlords don't take a great opportunity of those insurance that are in place. So if there's any challenges there, tenants for whatever reason can't pay the rent, falls into any type of problems, there are insurance there in place that landlords can take out, whereby the insurance continues to pay the rent and any legal expenses that may arise from that as well. So, lack of potential rent guarantee. I guess that's part of the same point that I've just pointed out. That's it. I think I've come to the end, and just looking if there are any further questions. And it seems that's pretty much it. So I hope that I've answered most of the questions. This message was done based with regards to the the rent reform. Apparently, there's another question here from Chloe. Okay, I see it here. So apologies, Chloe. If the markets come down, if a renter is in a contract of 2 years for X amount, would they be able to ask me to reduce the rent? Do any of the new policies give them power to demand this from me? So apologies, Chloe. I'm just going to read this once again. So if the market rate comes down, if a renter is in a 2-year contract of X amount, would they be able to ask me to reduce the rent? Do any of the new policies give them power to demand this from me? Okay, so if you're on a 2-year contract and the rent is X amount, and then suddenly the rent goes down within that contract, I would say no. If you're fixed and the tenancy is ongoing, then I would say no. That being said, and the reason I will say no is because in the same way, the reverse is also equal. If you're in a 2-year contract and it's fixed and the rent is fixed for those 2 years, and the rent suddenly goes up 50%, then if it's been signed that it's 2 years and that's going to be the rent, then it's not fair for the landlord to then ask you for the 50% increase, right? But here's the difference. If these laws do come into power, and they will, at least most of them that's been proposed at some point, remember the fixed term tenancy is going to come to an end, which means that all tenancy is going to be periodic. So if the rents increase, you have the opportunity as a tenant to say to the landlord, actually, this is rent is too high for me. And you know what? Here's my 2 months notice. I'm going to move out of London, or I found, a land or somewhere else who's prepared to give me a better rent. And so goodbye. So if the rent doesn't work for you, if it's increased, whether that's in 12 months, 24 months, or whatever that may be, and you're in a periodic statutory tenancy, then you can just jump ship. And that's what landlords, of course, are perhaps not happy about. But I guess that makes the market a little bit more open, especially for tenants, because um, they're not going to be fixed to that particular contract. I hope that makes sense. So you're going to have more freedom to jump ship if and when that time comes. One thing to point out, though, there's going to be a transition, of course. Once this law comes in, there will be a transition. So it's not going to be, let's say, in April, the law passes, and then if you're on a fixed term tenancy, then immediately that law is going to be introduced to the tenancy that you have. It's very likely that ongoing tenancies that are happening at the moment will have a period of time whereby this is going to transition to that new legislation that has been passed, or regulation. So it could be like in 6 months' time, then that will transition into that periodic tenancy, as opposed to immediately. But again, as I said before, there are delays on that rental reform, and it will be interesting to see which of these are going to pass and when it's going to be passed and what government, right? Because at the moment, what's interesting is that it seems that the there's a couple of things here. So if it does pass with the Conservative at the moment, whether that which leader is going to be in place, and if it's a different leader, whether that leader is going to want to review the proposal and change it, or perhaps even scrap it completely. We don't know that. At the moment, what we do know is, of course, that the government wants to win votes. And what they're going to promise is going to be also interesting. Labour, for example, seems to be slightly more renter friendly. And it'll be interesting to see what Labour continues to propose on the rent reform to get those renters' votes. And if Labour is the one that's going to be in power, what of these what they will be able to actually push through. I hope that makes sense. And it is very much let's say the government wants the votes, and it will be very interesting to find out what else they propose. Again, thank you so much for jumping in. Just leave a comment below. Anything that's any questions that you may have, I'll be happy to try and help out with this. So thank you so much, and jumping out. Have a good evening.